Ms. Morris, we are now live.
Lovely. Thanks, Julian. Good evening and welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the first meeting of the 2022 Redistricting Committee. This evening, this will be our first meeting, and on our agenda tonight, we have some introductions planned and election of a chair, and then some presentations from our consultants, research and polling. We'll then take some public comments and we'll wrap up the evening with any discussion amongst the committee. This evening, to start off, I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Petra Morris. I'm the Associate Director of Planning and Policy Development for City Council. I work with all 9 of the city councillors on their a lot of land use and planning matters, but also on developing different policies for the city. As part of the City Council team, we also have Chris Melendrez, who's the Director of Council Services, and Chris Sylvan, who is one of our special projects policy analysts. We also have from Council Services, Delana Carmona, who's our administrative support, and Julian Moya, who helps us with all things technical and Zoom related. Research and polling will be doing their own introductions here in a few minutes, but we have Brian Sanderhoff, Michael Sharp, and Brittany Poss with research and polling, who are our consultants. I thought it would be nice just to kind of start off by each of the committee members just introducing yourselves, as we're in an electronic format, so just say your name and a thing or two about yourself. What I will do is I'll run through my council district. That's probably the easiest way for us to go through all this. So starting with District 1, Victor Segura, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure, my name is Vic Segura. That's what I go by, Vic. I'm a lifelong native of Albuquerque. I have lived in other areas of the country working for the federal government. I worked for the federal government for 36 years, retired. I was also an officer in the reserves and got to visit the countries of Iraq and Afghanistan. I did 2 tours in Iraq. I went back and did a civilian tour for 2.5 years in Iraq, came home, went to work for a mining company. I'm a safety manager by profession and education. And I did that for 5 years, and I came home, and now I'm a small business owner. We teach CPR training to the general public. Will that do it? You're welcome.
And also from District 1, the District 1 alternate, Dan Aragon. You're on mute.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, great.
Excellent. Okay. Famous saying, you're on mute. Well, good evening. My name's Dan Aragon. I am also a lifelong resident of Albuquerque. I live on the west side, and I've lived up here since 1986. I've worked my whole life here in Albuquerque. I spent about 16 years working for Bernalillo County. And after that, I took some time off of that. And now I work for P&M, for the utility company, kind of a land use property rights gentleman. I work in the real estate department, and I'll be real brief and turn it over to the next person.
Lovely, thank you. So District 2, Keith Romero.
Good afternoon, good evening all. My name is Keith Romero. I'm a local attorney of 27 years. I'm a lifelong Burqueño, mostly in the downtown area here. I currently sit on the board for a nonprofit, the Morelos Community Coalition. I'm also a resident of the Old Town Sawmill area, still within District 2, but beyond that, that's really the origin of my connection, my experience with here in Albuquerque, and as it correlates to what we're here to do. But I'm excited to be part of this, very honored to be part of this, and looking forward to working with you all. Thanks.
Thank you. The District 2 alternate, Joaquin Baca, isn't on quite yet. So I'll go to the District 3 representative, Charisse Casada.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Charisse Casada. I reside in District 3. I'm actually the President of our neighborhood association, Route 66 West, former Secretary of Southwest Alliance of Neighbors, and I'm honored that Councilor Pena nominated me to sit on the redistricting committee.
Thank you. And the District 3 alternate, Luis Hernandez Jr.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Luis Hernandez Jr., also a resident here in District 3. Currently the Executive Director of the West Central Community Development Group, also President of the Southwest Alliance of Neighborhood Associations, and just like everybody else, lifelong resident group in the South Valley. Been here on the West Side for longer than I want to be. Just kidding. Thank you.
Thank you. And the District 4 Representative, Mark Reynolds.
Good evening, everyone. Mark Reynolds, District 4 President. I've been in Albuquerque since 1961, and I've been in higher ed for 40 years and going to retire in July, and in telecommunications for 45 years, and glad to be on the council.
Thank you. And the District 4 alternate, Rebecca Latham.
Hello, everyone. My name is Rebecca Latham. I'm an adopted daughter of Albuquerque. I've been here for 18 years, splitting my time between here and Red River. My children are at Desert Ridge and North Star, and my husband works for the state of New Mexico. I'm a former cabinet secretary, the cabinet secretary of tourism for 4 years, and currently the CEO of Girl Scouts of New Mexico Trails.
Thank you. So the District 5 Representative, Steve Smotherer, is not available this evening, but Robert Aragon is. So, Mr. Aragon.
Good evening, all. My name is Robert Aragon, born and raised in Albuquerque. I'm a practicing attorney for the last approximately 35 years, which is far too long. I formerly served in the state legislature. I've been the president of a board of regents. Most recently, I was in the state board of finance. Anxious to work with everyone and looking forward to this endeavor. So thank you for the opportunity to introduce myself.
Thank you. And District 6, Representative Catherine Mcgill.
Hello, everyone. My name is Catherine Mcgill. I am the founder and director of the New Mexico Black Leadership Council. I've been in Albuquerque since January 7th of 1984 at about 10:37 a.m. So a lot of years. I'm not a native, but came here when I was but a wee child, and have really loved living in the heart of the International District for most of the time that I've been in Albuquerque. I'm grateful to have been selected to be a part of this process, and I served as the chair of the Complete Count Committee for the Census for Bernalillo County. So really glad to be here to really further be able to explain this process to our constituencies. Thank you.
Thank you. District 6 alternate Rosendo Nahar is not available. So I'll move on to the District 7 Representative Travis Kellerman.
Thanks, Petra. Travis Kellerman. I came to Albuquerque to go to UNM from Silver City. That was almost 20 years ago. And I've been here in some form ever since. I've been very involved in the data and technology industry in the state, been connected to politics and policy throughout, and I really want to see data-driven dialogue in this process. So thanks for letting me introduce myself. It's an honor to be on the committee.
Thank you. And the District 7 alternate, Heather Bergmans.
Thank you, and hello, everyone. My name is Heather Bergman, and I am a lifelong resident of Albuquerque and the East Mountains. I work in campaigns at the state level, and I'm really excited to be here as well, to keep it short.
Thank you. District 8 Representative David Buchholz. You're on mute.
How's that? Better?
Perfect. I was dead on mute. Yes, great. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. My name is David Buchholz. I have been a resident of Albuquerque since 1981, which I guess for some of you would make me a lifelong resident, but my life is longer than that. I am an attorney with the Rodi law firm who has a practice in, among other things, government finance. I served as the City of Albuquerque's Bond and Finance Council under the administrations of Mayor Baca, Mayor Chavez, and Mayor Berry, 16 years, and more councilors than I care to act, and spent a lot of time in City Hall and in council meetings. I'm happy to participate in this endeavor. Some friends and old clients of mine are sitting here with me, and I say hello to all of them, they know who they are, and glad to be here.
Thank you. District 8 alternate Kevin Powers.
Good evening. Kevin Powers here. I'm a 40-year resident of District 8. Not a native Albuquerquean or New Mexican, but been here for 40 years. I guess that's pretty close to being lifelong. I'm a retired investment banker. I did public finance work all over the state of New Mexico for 30 years. Currently, I'm doing a little bit of a hobby job, I would kind of term it. I work for the New Mexico legislature during sessions as a tax analyst.
Lovely, thank you. District 9 Representative Kenneth Pascoe.
Hi, Ken Pascoe. I moved to Albuquerque the first time in 1996 when I was stationed here with the Air Force. The Air Force brought me back here a couple of times, and then I retired, took the uniform off in 2011. Been here ever since. I've lived in the Northeast on the west side, and now I'm in the Southeast in Fort Hills in District 9, of course. And then I'm currently a Sandia Labs employee, and my degrees are in electrical engineering.
Thank you. And last but not least, the District 9 alternate Thomas Stahl.
Good evening. I'm Tom Stahl. I spent 33 years in the Air Force. I'm a retired Air Force colonel. Once I retired from the Air Force, my wife and I came back to Albuquerque. She is an Albuquerque resident. I did spend 2 tours at Kirtland in my 33 years in the Air Force. Came back here, went to work for a defense contractor, spent a second career with them, retired as vice president of that particular company. So twice retired. I think I got it right the second time. I am retired at this point. I look forward to working with the committee on this project. Thank you.
Thank you. We will, it's great to hear a little bit about everyone. And we'll now move on to the election of the chair. For this, we'll do a roll call. When we take the vote, we'll do a roll call vote. We'll do roll call votes for all of our votes on Zoom. And for those, I will go by council district rather than alphabetical order, because the alphabetical order will change each meeting depending on whether the representative is there or an alternate. And I think it might be a bit too confusing to change our alphabetical order every time. So hopefully everybody's okay with that slight difference to Robert's rules. So for election of the chair, are there any nominations?
Madam Chair?
Yes.
Robert Odegon. I'd like to nominate David Burkholz for chair.
Okay. Any other nominations for chair?
Petra Morris. This is Travis Kellerman. I nominate Catherine Mcgill for chair of this committee.
Okay. Any other nominations? Great. So before we vote, David Buckholtz, do you accept that nomination?
I'm a little surprised, but thanking. I'm a little surprised, but thanking member Aragon, who is a friend and a colleague of mine. I'll accept the nomination.
Thank you. And Catherine Mcgill, do you accept the nomination?
I absolutely do. Thank you.
Great. Okay, I will do a roll call vote now of each of the representatives, with the exception of District 5, where Mr. Smotherin is out, and so we'll have Robert Aragon doing the vote for District 5. As I read through, instead of doing a yay or nay, please tell me whether you are voting for Mr. Buckholtz or Ms. Mcgill. So starting with District 1, Victor Segura.
I'll go with David Buckholz.
District 2, Keith Romero.
Ms. Mcgill.
District 3, Sharice Casada.
Miss Mcgill.
District 4, Mark Reynolds.
Ms. Mcgill.
District 5, Robert Aragon.
David Buckholz.
District 6, Catherine McGill.
Catherine McGill.
District 7, Travis Kellerman.
Catherine McGill.
District 8, David Buckholz.
I'll vote for Mr. Buckholz.
Great. And District 9, Kenneth Pascoe.
Mr. Buckholz.
Okay, let me do some quick math. We have a majority with Ms. McGill at 5 votes. So Ms. McGill, you are the chair. Congratulations.
I think should I say thank you?
Well, hopefully. And do we have any nominations for a vice chair?
I would like to, Petra, nominate Travis Kellerman for vice chair.
Thank you. Any other nominations for vice chair?
I'll self-nominate myself, Victor Segura.
Okay. Any other nominations for vice chair? Lovely. Okay, so we have a choice of Travis Kellerman or Victor Segura, and I will do the same roll call vote for vice chair. So District 1, Victor Segura.
Victor Segura.
District 2, Keith Romero.
Mr. Kellerman.
District 3, Sharice Casada.
Mr. Kellerman.
District 4, Mark Reynolds.
Mr. Kellerman.
District 5, Robert Aragon.
Victor Segura.
District 6, Catherine McGill.
Travis Kellerman.
District 7, Travis Kellerman.
Travis Kellerman.
District 8, David Buckholz.
Mr. Segura.
And District 9, Kenneth Pascoe.
Mr. Segura.
Okay, let me. We have a winner in Mr. Kellerman with 5 votes. So congratulations, Mr. Kellerman. You are the vice chair.
Thank you.
Thank you. And since while we were voting, I noticed that Joaquin Baca, who is the District 2 alternate, has joined us. Joaquin, thank you for joining us. Earlier, we did some very short introductions. If you have a moment to just tell us a little bit about yourself, and then we'll hand over to research and polling.
Hi, everybody. My apologies, I'll be late. Great for your conference. Joaquin Baca, current board director for the Rio Grande Conservancy District and longtime downtown resident. So thank you. Thanks for having me here. Thank you to everyone who's part of it.
Thank you. So this is the sort of the end of my voice on here for tonight. I'll now hand over to Brian Sanderhoff and Michael Sharp and Brittany Poss with Research and Polling, who are going to take us through some background for the busy work that you guys have ahead of you in the coming months.
You, Ms. Morris. Hi, it's Brian Sanderhoff. Can you all hear me okay? Okay, very good. Well, it's a pleasure to work with the Redistricting Committee once again. We appreciate the opportunity to provide professional and technical services to you to assist in the redistricting process. Besides myself, Brian Sanderhoff, Michael Sharp is on the line here. You can see him. He's Vice President of Research and Polling. And Brittany Poss from Research and Polling. She's the Director of Data and Analytics. And we'll be pretty much the three primary contacts working with you on this project in one form or another. There are many other people at Research and Polling who will provide assistance. Many familiar faces here on the committee, many people who we've worked with sometime in the last 20, 30, or I hate to say it, 40 years ago, but that is the case with some of you. And some of you may know us, for those who don't, from our public opinion survey research work that we do for the media, the Albuquerque Journal, the TV stations. We don't work for candidates. We avoid appearance of conflicts of interest, but we do a lot of public opinion research for decades in the Albuquerque area and the state of New Mexico. But for those of you who don't know, we've also been specializing in redistricting, of providing professional and technical services to local governments throughout the state of New Mexico. In fact, 10 years ago and 20 years ago, and Michael, maybe 30 years ago, we provided those services for the city of Albuquerque to provide the technical support to you in terms of the map making, the data, drawing conceptual plans based on your feedback and your input. We also have done the state legislature in providing their technical services for the last 30 years. And during that process, they formed a citizen redistricting committee, which is similar to the process that you have, in that it's your mission to make recommendations to the city council on plans that you think are best. And through that CRC process for the state, we actually attended 16, oftentimes 5-hour community meetings, getting public feedback on redistricting. Many of those meetings happened in Albuquerque, where we enjoyed a lot of information, hearing about the international district, hearing about the West Side, the kinds of things that I know that you'll be very concerned about and be telling us about. So that's pretty much us at Research and Polling. The Albuquerque City Charter requires, as you know, the establishment of the City Redistricting Committee, and to review and make recommendations to the City Council concerning the 9 City Council districts. And every 10 years, the City Council must adjust the council district boundaries to account for these population shifts. So at this time, if we could share the screen, and Brittany's going to control a slideshow that we're going to put together, which I'm responsible for the first part, and then Brittany will take it from there. And so we just first talked about our introductions and your basic mission. So if we can go to the timeline slide. And so let's talk about the timeline. Some of you may know this if you've scrutinized the resolution, or if you've been talked about the kind of commitment that this process is going to take over the next number of months. And so according to the city resolution that the council passed, your work must be complete by January 1st per city council resolution. So what the city of Albuquerque has done is they have scheduled 8 meetings to accomplish the task of redistricting, for you to complete your work to make those recommendations to the council. So the way these meetings have been pre-scheduled by the city As you can tell, there are 2 meetings per month, 2 in March, 2 in April, 2 in June, and 2 in March, April, May, May and June. And so the pre-scheduled meetings are accomplished in order to give both the committee members and the public some advance notice for planning purposes. All the meetings are Zoom meetings, which creates a certain amount of convenience, certain amount of personal safety. Some of these dates were selected to accommodate the city council staff to avoid overlapping conflicts with scheduling with other city council meetings that are occurring. Now, you may find that you don't need 8 meetings to accomplish your work. And notice there's even suggestions there as to which meetings on May 18th and June 29th as needed. You got to get your work done by July 1st. But if it turns out you're ahead of the game or reaching a lot of consensus, it's possible you can cut short some meetings. But at the same time, you may find you need more, or that you may need special meetings that could be called to accomplish your task. And so that can always be done. Although all of these meetings are subject to the Open Meetings Act. And as such, for example, for a regular meeting, the ones that are pre-scheduled, you would be submitting your agenda, posting it online 72 hours before the meeting, which would mean basically on a Friday afternoon for these Wednesday meetings to post the agenda. Now, the city has set up a special project website to post all information about the redistricting process. You can see the URL on this slide. So this website will be a place where the public can look at the agendas. They can see the meeting dates, and the proposed plans that you're designing will also be, the conceptual options will also be posted on the website. Now, if a person doesn't have computer access, they can still contact council services. Council services will be sort of like the point group, Ms. Petra Morris, for people who, let's say, don't have computer access. If they want to call in, phone or mail or email, contact council services, and she will compile all that information and provide it to committee members the day before each meeting, and also post it on the website. For people who don't want to or don't feel comfortable using computers, she'll even take the task of printing maps on hard copy paper and sending them in the mail to people if they don't have that access. So that's pretty much the approach as we see it for, and what the city has set out for the timeline. So if we move on to the next slide, as you know, there are 9 members of the committee, that 1 per city council district, 9 alternates as well, 1 per city council district. Now, the alternates may participate, according to the city council resolution, in all of the meetings that the committee is having. But when it comes to the alternates may not vote unless the committee member from their district is absent at the time of the vote. So again, alternates can participate in all the meetings, only vote though if their designate member is not available at the time of the vote. Then on the next slide, in terms of your voting procedures, when it comes to adopting regular motions, just typical motions that someone might make on the committee in the course of conducting your business, according to the resolution passed by the city council, it takes a majority of those members present to adopt a regular motion. So let's say there's only 7 members or alternates who are present for a particular meeting, then a majority would be 4 out of 7 to adopt a motion, we'll call a regular motion. But when it comes to the most important task that you will be accomplishing, and that is the adoption of final recommendations to the city council, that'll take at least 5 votes, 5 of the 9, regardless of how many people attend the meeting. It takes a majority of the 9 to adopt a recommendation. Now, as Ms. Petra Morris said, because it's on Zoom, it gets a little awkward to raise hands or to say voice votes. So the city has requested that as the chairperson runs the meetings, and then staff will assist, that all motions will be acted upon by roll call votes. On the next slide, we see that when it comes to the committee's final recommendations, you as a committee may include one or more maps for the city council to consider. That's as stated within the city resolution. So you may come up with one map you recommend. The city council is not obligated to select that map, but they are obligated to consider it. You may decide that if there's not a total consensus, that you want to propose more maps. You will ultimately need to decide how to go about selecting the number of plans to recommend to the council. But you may want to wait until you see how much consensus arises among your group to decide if you want to, recommend more than one map, and you'll have to set out those procedures. And within the resolution, it also speaks to the fact that you could consider a minority report if there's some people who disagree with what the majority stated. So, and then just moving on to the next slide, which is the cover sheet for Brittany's presentation. Tonight, basically, we'll be reviewing the basic constitutional and demographic principles of redistricting. As established in state and federal law, we've been working with these demographic trends and case law and laws here at Research and Polling for 40 years. And also the review of the basic constitution demographic principles that were established within the city resolution itself, because the city resolution also gives you some guidance as to the do's and don'ts that they would like you to follow. The second thing we'll do tonight is we'll review Albuquerque's city population statistics. These are the statistics both at the city of Albuquerque level and at the city council district level, so that you can see what changes have occurred in growth rates at the city level and the city district level, because your mission ultimately is to adjust the boundaries based on population shifts, which we'll get into a little deeper, but you need to see how those growth rates have changed, and unfortunately they have been uneven. At the next meeting, after this one, we will present to you some conceptual maps for your review and consideration. Some may be based on feedback we received tonight. The conceptual maps that we'll present at the next meeting will show different options and different approaches to account for the population shifts. This then will give you the opportunity to react and to give us guidance for future plans that we can draw on your behalf. And these plans that will be presented will also be posted on the city website for public comment, the ones that we spoke of a few minutes ago. Then in subsequent meetings to the next meeting, we will present adjusted plans based upon your input and based upon the public feedback. So through this process of going through 8 different meetings, we hope to get to the point where you feel comfortable with recommending the plans that you like to move forward to the city council. Just as a personal note, someone's been doing this for many, many decades. Just want to, advise you that there really is no such thing as the perfect plan. You will be a group of people taking on this project in the most sincere way, doing your public service to the community. But we all come from different viewpoints and perspectives, and you too will have different priorities. You might look at different plans and really think that this particular plan really does what's best for the district that you're representing, and in fact it will. But it's our job to present different approaches. One of the interesting things about districting is you can draw your perfect district, but it might have a ripple effect and affect 2, 3, 4, or 5 other districts. So what we do recommend is that although you represent a particular city council district in a particular region of the city, that you're always looking at the city as a whole because of the ripple effects that occur as one district gets adjusted, its boundaries, it sometimes affects the entire map. So think worldly from the city perspective as compared to just from a city council district perspective. Madam Chair, this concludes my comments as it relates to the first part of the agenda. And Madam Chair and committee members, Brittany Poss from Research and Polling will tackle the next topic, which is the covering the districting principles that one needs to abide by in the course of redistricting.
Thank you, Brian, and thank you, Madam Chair and committee members. Can you all hear me okay? Yes?
Yes.
Okay, sorry. I can't see anything with the screen shared. So I, as Brian said, will be walking you through the basic principles of redistricting, talking about what your specific requirements are as outlined in your authorizing legislation. And then we're going to do my favorite part, which is looking at the actual census data for Albuquerque and talking about the implications that the data have for drawing districts. So we can jump right in here. Just a little background, a little level setting. As you know, redistricting is the process of redrawing electoral district boundaries. It's required by the Constitution after the Census Bureau completes their count. And as you all know, and maybe some more than others, Madam Chair, the census happened in 2020. And the goal of the census was to count everyone living in the United States. And once we get those data back, we use the census data to redraw districts. And the goal really is to equalize population across districts, to get at a core tenet of representative democracy, which is one person, one vote. You know, when districts have unequal population, there's really sort of power imbalances across districts. Some votes may count more, some may count less if districts aren't equal. We use the census data to determine what equal means and redraw the districts. This is also an opportunity every 10 years to rethink district boundaries, to think about how people have moved and shifted, think about, you know, new communities of interest or neighborhoods, and make improvements and create districts that are going to last another 10 years. So this is a really exciting time. I wanted to make just one comment about the census data itself. You know, despite everyone's best efforts, you know, during the pandemic, we know that the census data isn't perfect. We know that there are some issues with census data, but we do still use these data for redistricting because there are very stringent requirements for redistricting data. It has to be a census, has to be a head count rather than an estimation based on samples or based on sort of cobbling together different sources of data. And it has to be consistent across the jurisdiction. So one of the suggestions that we heard somewhat often while we were doing public hearings for the state was, you know, in tribal areas where we know there was a severe undercount, you know, can we use tribal membership rules? Well, the issue is that only covers tribal areas, and the data that we use for the census has to be consistent across the jurisdiction. So just a note that, you know, we recognize that there are issues with the census data, but it's really sort of in the grand scheme of things, the best redistricting data option that we have. And so that's why we use it. So we're going to talk about the sort of major principles of redistricting. These are equal population, minority voting rights, contiguity, compactness, and communities of interest. And these are just important things to keep in mind as we're drawing districts so that we can draw fair legal districts. So the first thing we'll talk about is equal population. And obviously this is incredibly important because, as I said, this is really sort of the driving reason behind redistricting is equalizing population across districts. So when we think about equal population, we come up with a number that is an ideal population for each district. And this is some fancy math, so bear with me, just kidding. It's just the total population of the city as a whole divided by 9 council districts. And that gets you the ideal population of each district. Now, we often can't get districts exactly equal because of how people are clustered in geographic space, or sometimes we'll want flexibility to achieve other goals of redistricting, which we'll talk about as we go along. And so in the law, we have some leeway. The law says that districts only have to be substantially equal. And what that means for local governments in New Mexico is that all districts are within plus or minus 5% of that ideal district population. And we call that the population deviation, the percentage difference the population is from the ideal district population. There has to be good reasons for a deviation. You can't just sort of use that plus or minus 5% leeway to gerrymander or violate voting rights. But it is useful to help achieve some other goals of redistricting, not to have every district exactly perfectly equal. The next principle is minority voting rights. And before we jump into this, I just want to note that minority voting rights is kind of an awkward term. It's really a legal term. We know that communities of color are not the minority in Albuquerque or in New Mexico. But this language comes directly out of the Voting Rights Act. And so that's sort of why we're still using this more outdated language. So minority voting rights is essentially when you're drawing districts, you want to be careful not to dilute the voting strength of communities of color. You want to create districts that allow communities of color to elect the candidate of their choice. And most often the thing you want to look out for is whether there's packing or cracking in districts. And packing is when you concentrate as much of a community of color into as few districts as possible to minimize the number of districts in which the community of color has the opportunity to elect a candidate of their choice. Cracking is sort of the opposite of that. You split up a community of color into as many districts as possible to minimize the community's influence in any given district. So we want to be really careful that we're identifying, any sort of racial issues along the sort of packing and cracking line. So who is covered by this constitutional minority voting rights? The VRA, this comes out of the Voting Rights Act, so it's very clear it's Hispanic, Native, Black communities. And there's some very specific factors that were sort of settled in a 1986 case that govern when a community of color is required to have a district drawn for them, a VRA district drawn for them. And these factors are that they are compact enough and large enough to constitute a majority in a district, that they're politically cohesive, that they vote cohesively, and that the majority votes as a block to keep the minority group's preferred candidate from winning. So a community of color must meet all three of these criteria and establish by a totality of the circumstances that political processes have not been equally open to communities of color, and that communities of color have had fewer opportunities to participate and elect representatives of their choosing. We often use historical data to make that argument, and we look at sort of historical election returns to identify whether these factors are being met. There is a caveat to this, and this comes out of some court cases in the 90s that disallowed race as the predominant factor in redistricting. So you can't use race as the predominant factor in drawing a district, and that constitutes racial gerrymandering if you're sort of ignoring other principles of redistricting and focusing just on race. And for example, this is North Carolina's 12th congressional district as it was drawn in 1991. And they essentially followed a highway to pick up a whole bunch of Black folks and sort of pack them into this district. This is also a really good example of packing. So districts like this are not allowed. It's racial gerrymandering, but it's a fine line to walk, thinking about how to protect the voting strength of communities of color without racially gerrymandering. And again, we want to look for things like packing and cracking. So the next principle of redistricting that you'll need to keep in mind is contiguity. And this is just the idea that all parts of the district are connected in geographic space. So you can see the figure on the left, these A, B, and C districts are contiguous. They're all sort of touching each other. On the left, or sorry, on the right, these are non-contiguous districts. District A is not contiguous because there's sort of an island of District A within District B that's not touching District A at all in geographic space. So this is a pretty straightforward one. One thing I do want to note is that the city's boundaries are sort of interesting, like what is in the city and what's out of the city. And so there are pieces of the city that are actually, you know, part of, that are within the city limits that look like islands of population, that look like sort of non-contiguous pieces. And you'll see these, especially in the South Valley. When we start looking at the maps, I'll point this out to you. But these are actually connected to the rest of the city through what's known as road contiguity. The city annexes the road from the main part of the city to those little areas of population when they annex them. So I'll point that out when we get to a map, but that's the only sort of tricky thing about contiguity in this context. The next principle is compactness. Compactness is interesting because there's no real sort of hard and fast definition. There's lots of different measures of compactness, but they're all basically just about how districts are distributed around their center point. Is it sprawling with lots of sort of pieces jutting off, or is it pretty concentrated around one center point? A good example is New Mexico's Congressional District 3. This is as it stood in 1991. And this is a huge piece of territory. This is the entire northern half of the state, but it's relatively compact in shape, especially as compared to Texas's Congressional District 18 in 1991, where you can see it's just sort of all over the place. There's pieces cut out of the middle. This is a very non-compact district. So we just want to keep an eye out for drawing districts that sort of look like shapes and don't look like pencils or snakes. And then finally, the final principle of redistricting is communities of interest. And a community of interest is a group or geographic area that have shared characteristics like neighborhood, language, history, economics, their lived experience. And it's drawing districts to keep these groups together. This is what the public can be really helpful in, is identifying the communities of interest in Albuquerque. Nobody knows their neighborhood like the people that live there. But the whole point of communities of interest is just to draw maps that honor those existing sort of connections and neighborhoods and communities. So we'll want to keep an eye out for that. I do want to note that, you know, as Brian said earlier, there's no such thing as a perfect district. And sometimes these principles can be in tension with one another. So for example, honoring a community of interest may affect how compact a district is, or ensuring minority voting rights and creating majority minority districts may mean larger population deviations. So it's about following the legal rules and guidelines and prioritizing these principles to create districts that are best for the city. And you know, we trust you all to do that for us as people who live here in Albuquerque. So next, I want to talk about, you know, sort of beyond the general principles of redistricting, there are specific requirements for this committee in the resolution that sort of authorizes you all. There are things that the committee must think about in designing districts according to the resolution, things you can consider and things you're not allowed to consider as you're drawing districts. So first we'll start with the shalls. According to the resolution, the districts that you all draw shall be contiguous. We talked about that. They should all touch each other in geographic space. They should be relatively compact with as few geographic extremes as possible. So that compactness shall attempt to preserve communities of interest. And I want to note that this is a little bit soft language, attempt to preserve communities of interest. Communities of interest tend to be the sort of stickiest one of those principles. Communities of interest are often in the eye of the beholder. Sometimes they can be in conflict with one another. You know, that's a tricky one. And so it's the best that you can, you shall attempt to preserve those communities of interest within districts. Next, you're required to adhere to existing precinct lines except where divided by municipal boundaries. And because we didn't talk about this in the principles, I want to dive a little deeper here. So across New Mexico, we use voting precincts as the building blocks for districts. So precincts are sort of the smallest unit that we then build districts out of. This makes election administration easier. It's less confusing for voters than, if somebody on one side of a precinct is in one district and the other side of the precinct is in another district. So we're using precincts as the building blocks. But what's interesting about Albuquerque is that the municipal boundaries don't follow precinct boundaries exactly. And in the vast majority of cases, that's not an issue at all. But there might be some cases where a precinct will dip in and out of the city in different places. And depending on where you draw districts, pieces of a precinct may be in different districts. And so the ordinance allows you to split precincts like this that intersect municipal boundaries. And I'm going to give you an example because I just said a bunch of words that may not mean anything to you. So this is an example from the current districts that we're living with right now, the current city council districts. What you're looking at here is the eastern boundary of the city. So you see District 8 in the north and District 9 in the south, running up into to the foothills in the East Mountains. And what you see highlighted in red here is a single precinct that sort of juts into District 8, goes out into the East Mountains, and then has a little tiny sliver of District 9. And I'm going to show you the pieces that are just inside the municipal boundaries. So you can see, the little piece of District 8 and an even littler piece of District 9, that's one precinct. And so when maps were drawn in 2010 and they wanted to, have the boundary between District 8 and District 9 along Montgomery, it split that precinct. And I would like to note that that piece of the precinct in District 9 doesn't have any people in it. There's just a water tower on that piece of the precinct. And so this isn't actually affecting any voters at all. All of the voters in this precinct within the municipal boundaries are in District 8. And so this is a really good reason to split a precinct. Precincts wholly contained within municipal boundaries cannot be split according to the resolution. And then finally, you shall follow constitutional principles governing voting rights. So where communities of color meet the requirements for voting rights protections, you want to make sure that we're drawing districts that allow the community the opportunity to elect a candidate of their choice. Okay, so those are the shalls. So as you're drawing districts, you may do the following things. Sort of after you sort of do the shalls, you can consider one, preserving the core of existing districts. And the idea here is that you all can decide to only make small changes to the existing map. You can really prioritize, keeping a downtown North Valley district, and only sort of adjusting the boundaries for population. You may also consider the residence of incumbents. You can decide whether you want to draw districts that account for where current city councilors live or not. And then there is one shall not. You are prohibited by the resolution from using partisan election data or registration data in designing plans. So you're not allowed to use any sort of partisan data as you're coming up with plans. Okay, now the fun part. After the rules, here comes the fun, actually looking at the census data. So according to the 2020 census, the population of Albuquerque is 564,550. And I want to draw your attention to the three columns to the right here. This is population change over the decades. So the rightmost column is the population change from the 2010 census to the 2020 census. And the city of Albuquerque grew 3.4% in the last decade. In previous decades, from 2000 to 2010, the city of Albuquerque grew 21.7%. And in the decade before that, 1990 to 2000, the city grew by 15.9%. So the city actually experienced a much smaller, like orders of magnitude smaller rate of growth this decade than in previous decades. And we're seeing this all the way across the state. The state of New Mexico only grew 2.8% over the decade. So the city of Albuquerque actually grew a little faster than the state as a whole, but it's still not as fast as it's grown in previous decades. And that growth was not equally distributed across the city. Some areas grew a lot and some actually lost population. So this is the first time that we're sort of actually looking at a map of the city council districts. So these are current districts, and I'm gonna make it so that you can hopefully see my mouse and just sort of orient us a little bit to where we are on the map. So this line here, this is I-40. This here is I-25 coming up through the middle of the city. The river is here. So these are the 3 West Side districts. This is Paradise Hills, Taylor Ranch. This is the South Valley. These are those little pieces that look like they're not contiguous in the South Valley, but they're actually connected to District 3 by a road. And then we've got, the East Mountains over here. This is the university area, Four Hills, the Heights up in here. So hopefully that helps a little bit to sort of orient where we are. It's always a little bit of a shock to me every time I haven't seen the municipal boundaries in a while, what is and is not in the actual Albuquerque city limits. But here we are. So let's look at the population change from 2010, from the last census to the 2020 census for each council district. And as I said, growth is not equally distributed across the city. So the highest rates of growth happened on the west side of Albuquerque. So districts 5, 1, and 3. And you can see District 5 had the highest rate of growth at 15.9%. District 1 also significantly high rates of growth at 8.1. And District 3 was also growing at a higher rate than the city as a whole at 4.8. And we'll talk in a minute about the implications for those 3 West Side districts because of that growth. Growth was basically static in District 2, in that sort of downtown North Valley district. It, according to the census, grew by about 20 people over the decade. Some growth in District 4 and District 9. So some growth east of the river. District 4 at 3.4%, exactly the same as the city as a whole. District 9 at 3.1%, so a little slower than the city as a whole. Negative growth in District 6, 7, and 8. District 6 actually had the highest rate of negative growth at -4%, District 7 at -0.4%, and District 8 at almost 1% negative growth. So I'm going to switch gears a little bit. We've been talking about just straight raw population numbers, and I'm going to pivot to looking at a different statistic, which is the population deviation. So when we talked about the principles of redistricting, we talked about equal population, and we talked about that ideal district population. So based on the 2020 census, the ideal population of each district is 62,727. And what I'm showing you here is for the current districts, each district's percentage deviation from that ideal population. And remember that ideal population is just the total population of the area divided by 9, and we're allowed plus or minus 5% from that ideal. And so again, this is the current district's deviation from that ideal population of 62,727. This is not population growth, it's deviations from the ideal population. You'll be looking at this statistic a lot as we're thinking about maps and moving lines to make sure that maps are upholding the equal population requirement. So what you'll see here is that 6 of the 9 districts are within the allowable deviation from the ideal population. And we might expect that at 3.4% growth across the city, a lot of districts are going to be within plus or minus 5% of an ideal population. But this does not mean that the boundaries of these districts are definitely not going to change. As Brian mentioned earlier, you can't look at a single district in isolation because they're affected by their neighboring districts. They might be affected by the need for other districts to grow or shrink. So what we can see is that District 5 is way too large. It's almost 16% over the ideal district population. And so District 5 is going to need to shrink, is going to need to lose some population. And as you can see, the only district that District 5 touches in geographic space within Albuquerque municipal boundaries is District 1. So even though District 1 is within plus or minus 5% of the ideal population, it's definitely going to have its boundaries adjusted to take on some of District 5's population. District 6 and District 8 are too small, and they're going to need to grow and pick up more population. So District 6 is -7% deviation, and District 8 is -8% deviation. So those are going to need to grow and take on more population. And those also, again, are likely to impact the surrounding districts, even though those districts are within the allowable deviation. So I want to talk a little bit about the cumulative deviations west and east of the river. So what you're seeing here is we just added up those deviations from the ideal population for the 3 districts west of the river and the 6 districts east of the river. And the last redistricting cycle, there just happened to be enough population to have 3 wholly contained west side districts, District 5, 1, and 3. This time you can see that there's almost a quarter of a council seat, 23%, too many people on the west side of the river. And correspondingly, there's almost a quarter seat too few people on the east side of the river. That means at least one district is going to have to cross the river from east to west to pick up that excess population from the west side. There's also a contiguity challenge here that I just want to note. You can see that there's just a narrow bridge across the river that's within Albuquerque's city limits between Central and I-40. And there's a little sliver just south of Central, but that's essentially the only bridge within the city limits between the east side and the west side of the city. So we can't cross any districts anywhere else because then we'd have some contiguity issues. So we only have that little bridge to cross and to equalize population between the 2 sides of the river. So that's a challenge that you all should keep in mind. That's probably going to be one of your bigger challenges as we go through this process. And then the final thing I want to talk about is the race and ethnicity data for the city. So this is citywide adult race and ethnicity data. And when we look at racial data for redistricting, we typically are looking at the adult population or the voting age population because we're using race and ethnicity data to look at voting rights issues for communities of color. We tend to look at the voting age population. So what we can see here is according to the 2020 census, the adult Hispanic population was 44.1%. The Black non-Hispanic population is 3.0. The Asian non-Hispanic is 3.3. The Native non-Hispanic is 4.3. And the white population of adults in Albuquerque was 41.6. And again, these groups are not evenly distributed across the city, as you might expect. So this shows you the proportions of the different racial and ethnic communities in each district. So currently we have 2 majority Hispanic voting age population districts, District 1 and District 3. So District 1, the Hispanic voting age population is 57.9, and in District 3, it's 79.5. These are the current districts using the 2020 census data. District 2 was a majority Hispanic voting age population district. I'm sorry, is there a question or? Sorry, can't see anything. So District 2 was a Hispanic voting age population district when these districts were drawn. It was about 51% Hispanic voting age population, but it's fallen to 49.2%. And so that's below 50%, obviously. I want to note in District 3 that, you know, the Hispanic voting age population here is really high. It's almost 80%. And so, you know, there's a question here about whether this is sort of packing in District 3. But also District 3 is a South Valley district, which is a pretty strong community of interest. You know, so a question for you all as you go forward is, you know, is it better to sort of have a really high proportion of Hispanics in District 3? And keep the community of interest that is the South Valley together, or to split up that community of interest and sort of distribute that Hispanic population across a number of districts, or to keep it whole and keep it, you know, really high proportion Hispanic. That's a question. Other racial groups aren't large enough to require a voting rights district, but it is important to understand how these communities are distributed across the city. So quickly, the highest proportion of Black communities are in District 5, District 6, and District 9. Asian communities have the highest proportions in the Heights. So District 4, District 8, and District 9 have higher proportions than the city as a whole. The Native communities have a high proportion in District 6. And then I also want to note that all districts are majority non-white except for District 8, which is 59.4% white. So I thank you very much for your kind attention. I just felt like I talked at you for a very long time. But I appreciate you letting us sort of talk about what the issues are and sort of what we see in terms of data and challenges that you'll encounter and the things that you're sort of required to do. And so, Madam Chair, I think the next item on the agenda is public comment. And so I will stop sharing my screen and turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, research and polling staff, Brittany and Brian, for that very robust data. And I think that it's really exciting to see it all presented, and we'll get an opportunity to analyze it in these coming weeks and months. We do want to make this about the voice of the voters, and I want to make sure as we go through this process that we keep that ever present in our thinking about the voice of the voters. That is what redistricting is about. And so we want to make the time to hear from the public. It's currently 6:41, and I'm not sure how many people we have signed up to speak. Petra, if you could help me with that, to let me know how we're going to handle public comment and how long we're giving each person to speak.
Madam Chair, my colleague Julian Moyer will be handling the public comment portion. He will be asking members of the public to raise their hands, and Julian will call out each person. The usual time limit for city council meetings is 2 minutes for public comment. And so we haven't really discussed that as a group, but for tonight, if that works for you, we can have a time limit of 2 minutes.
I'd say that we should follow that convention for a time limit of 2 minutes from the public, and please let us know how many people we have signed up to speak.
Great, thank you. Julian, can you let us know how many folks we've got signed up?
Madam Chair, Ms. Morris, looks like 2 people have their hand raised so far. And for the attendees, please just use the raise your hand function, and we will go first come, first serve for comments. So we will, our first speaker will be the Adelante Progressive Caucus. Please go ahead and unmute yourself, and your 2 minutes will begin when you start speaking.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am. Please proceed.
Thank you. My name is Cheryl Harris. I apologize for the mix-up on the names. I live in the northwest quadrant of the city, born and raised here, and I've lived in all 4 quadrants of the city. My questions or comments are really questions for all of you. The presentations from tonight, will those be made available on your website, first of all? Secondly, we would like public meeting and public comments, but I'm not sure you're going to have a traveling show this year. It looks like you're going to be all on Zoom, regardless of where you live in the city. You won't have a Northeast or a Southeast meeting. Wanted to verify that. And are you going to have Redistrictor available, which was used in the state by research and polling for us to make our own maps for submission? Thank you very much, Ms. Mcgill.
Thank you very much. I guess Petra can answer those questions. Staff has some comments on whether or not redistricting is available, and I believe that all the meetings are going to be held online, and that this information will be posted on the website, but I'm not sure about whether or not Redistrictor is available.
So, Madam Chair, thank you. Yes, you're correct. Everything will be going on to the website. The website will include all materials presented. It will also include a recording. So if you are not able to watch a meeting, you can certainly go on and watch it the next day. And you can send your public comments into me. I'll be collecting those and then distributing them to the committee members so that they can consider them before the next meeting. In terms of the format, they are all on Zoom. However, if it is the will of the committee to have geographic topic-based meetings where we have a Zoom meeting that is dedicated to the Northeast Heights or the Southeast Heights or the Northwest or the Southwest, we can certainly do that. But we wanted to make sure that the meetings were predictable and easily attainable for everybody, and Zoom kind of fit that bucket. I'll hand over to Brian Sanderhoff to answer the redistrict program question, because I'm not sure about that.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Ms. Morris. Districtor was a software that had contractual obligations with the state and with certain nonprofit groups to enable people to draw their own maps. It's a very robust system, and to my knowledge, the city of Albuquerque has not contracted with any other software companies to allow for online districting. What we intend to do, though, however, is all maps that are shown by research and polling, adjusted by the committee, will be posted online.
Thank you all, and I guess we'll when we get to committee discussion talk about whether or not that's something that we should take a look at. I think we had another person who signed up and had their hands up.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Our next speaker will be Maureen Skolran. Maureen,
yes.
Your time will begin once you start speaking. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. I'm with Fair Albuquerque Redistricting. I appreciate Vice Chair Kellerman's interest in data. I also have a background in data. An interest in data especially, and in redistricting in general, has been growing. So I asked the committee to provide to the public not just maps, images, but the data, so that we can help you, we can work with it, and more of a back and forth process, hopefully. And also, as part of that, when you get proposed maps, besides just, hopefully we could, if we can't get a portal, as Cheryl Harris suggested, where the public can draw maps, then we should at least be able to get data files. Mr. Sanderoff knows what I'm talking about. And also there's objective measurements that can be used for redistricting, mainly such as for compactness. And so when you have any of these proposed maps, the public should also get, and you should get, objective measures such as the population measures, the compactness, that type of thing. And also, as far as access and outreach, I would encourage you to work for non-English speakers, such as Spanish or whatever, to have outreach and access for them. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. And Mr. Sanderoff, if you might speak to that, whether or not we are going to be able to provide data in other ways.
Yes, and Michael, expand on anything I say. Yes, we can generate statistical reports for all of the proposed plans that would provide the population data, the racial data, et cetera. And yes, I guess we could also provide those shape files as well, Michael?
Oh, yeah, that's correct. You can certainly do that.
Okay.
And how will those be provided?
Online, or probably on the city portal, Michael?
Yeah, we can send them to the city staff and then they can post them as needed.
Thank you. And I have another question of city staff. Do we have any sort of budget to have the public be able to draw maps for our consideration for this committee?
Madam Chair, I don't know of any budget associated with the software for the map drawing. I'll have to follow up with our director on that. But I do believe that Council Services has some general funds for translation services. So we can get a translator to attend all of these meetings and therefore have Spanish language translation for all of the meetings. So I think we have the ability to do the Spanish language component, but I'm this evening not sure about the districtor costs associated with that. But we can certainly have all the shape files and statistical data and everything on the project website. We can structure that so that it's very clear where all the data is located, and so that people can download it.
Thank you very much. Are there any other members of the public who would like to speak?
Madam Chair, yes, we have 2 more people with their hand raised. So our next speaker will be Lan Senna. Ms. Senna, you have 2 minutes and your time will begin when you start speaking.
Moya, and thank you, members of the committee and Madam Chair. I want to first thank you all for your public service to our community and engaging in this important work. My name is Lan Senna. I am the Policy Director for the Center for Civic Policy. We've been engaged in nonpartisan redistricting and map drawing, and I just want to inform you all that we're all really looking forward to engaging in this process, specifically including in many of our community members. I'm grateful to see the presentation that Ms. Poss presented of really what changes our city is seeing and the real opportunity here to be bold in drawing council districts that really reflect our communities and our community voices in the democratic process. So I'm very excited to this and looking forward and proceeding of how our community engages. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Senna. Our next speaker is Chris Larnaga. Mr. Larnaga, please feel free to unmute yourself and your time will begin once you start speaking.
Good evening, group. Good evening, Chairwoman, Ms. Mcgill. Good to see you. As a case manager for individuals with disabilities, I was tuning into this meeting, and I'm a busy father, and I couldn't help but notice that the closed captioning option was not available for this meeting. So would it be possible to make that available, and then that in consideration of people that may not be able to have any other option but closed captioning? So would is that an option?
I'm going to say that we will make every attempt to comply with all of those accessibility kinds of things. Staff, would that be correct?
Madam Chair, yes. To be honest, I'm not quite sure why we don't have closed captioning tonight, but I'll certainly look into that and make sure we have that for all future meetings.
Thank you so much. Apologies that it wasn't available today. We'll make sure that we correct it for future. Anyone else?
Madam Chair, no other attendee has their hand raised, so that will conclude public comment.
Thank you. I'm so grateful to members of the public for showing up tonight. And now we do want to hear from these volunteer committee members, your discussion and comments about the presentation we've heard today. And what I'd like to hear is what your right now concerns are, comments, questions about this process for future. And so I guess we could just open it up, or we can go by district to call on both the member and the alternate from each district to find out if you have anything that you'd like to add to the record today about our process going forward. So we are in the committee comments and discussion portion of the meeting, and I would accept comments by district at this point if we could do that. Should we start with District 1?
Madam Chair, would you like me to call out who's representing each district in case it's not
Yeah, I would love for
forefront of everyone's minds?
Yeah, I would love to have everyone have the opportunity, if you would like, you may pass if you don't like, to discuss what you've heard and just how it resonated with you and what you'd like to see going forward based on that the information. And it might also be good to put back up the principles of redistricting, the things that we need to be looking at, and maybe committee members could base their comments based on those components of what we need to be looking at as a committee.
Madam Chair, then if we start with District 1, while research and polling are pulling that up, the representative for District 1 is Victor Segura, and the alternate is Dan Aragon.
All right. The other thing I'm concerned about right now is I need to look at the numbers. I'm sorry I missed. Are we going to get copies of the slides of the numbers?
Most definitely. They will be on the website and available to everyone from the public and to us as the committee members.
Okay. Other than that, I'm very excited to get started with this and hopefully provide very valuable input. I have lived in all quadrants of the city. I was the founding member of the coalition for District 4 on the far northeast heights, and I grew up in the International District. So I'm very familiar with the various parts of the city. On that, I don't have anything further.
Thank you, Petra. If you just continue calling.
Yes. District 2 is Keith Romero and Joaquin Baca.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you for the presentation. Very helpful. Good guiding factors. I mean, I guess overall, I see this as sort of the concern with the equitable allocation of representation. There's been some big changes in population. I want to echo what Mr. Kellerman said early on. I'd like to see a data-driven dialogue myself. I think that'll, just at first glance, will bear out in terms of some changes and challenges that we have. I think the contiguous requirement might be a challenge in terms of what direction the population is growing and accounting for some of these population changes and trying to keep diversity. But again, I see this fundamentally as the equitable allocation of representation and making sure that we satisfy all those requirements. So thank you all.
Thank you, Petra.
District 3, Charisse Casada and Luis Hernandez.
Thank you for tonight's presentation. I'm looking forward to generating recommendations with my fellow committee members while looking at the principles of redistricting, and my priority will be in keeping communities of interest together.
Thank you, Charisse. Luis, is he still here?
District 4, Mark Reynolds and Rebecca Latham.
Thank you. I have to applaud the research and polling presentation and the amount of data that was presented tonight. And I echo Mr. Romero's, what he stated of the value of the data-driven, because I think that'll drive a lot of our content and dialogue. And when we get into the weeds and looking at what are the factors, I think that's going to really help us overall to make those decisions and with the public input. So very well done.
I have a question, if I may, Madam Chair.
Yes, go ahead, Rebecca.
Thank you. So I was particularly interested in members of the Asian population not being included under minority voting rights, and I was pleased to see that would be represented under communities of interest, presumably. I'm curious if there's ever a circumstance in which the committee would need to weigh minority voting rights against a certain population group or a certain community of interest, in particular with regards to members of the Asian community.
Madam Chair, if I may.
Go ahead.
Asians are protected and language minority groups are protected under the Voting Rights Act.
I'm sorry, I thought it was specific to Hispanic, Native American, and Black Americans.
Yeah, Asians are protected as well under the Voting Rights Act. The issue is, as Brittany was saying, when it comes to requiring certain racial districts, you have to have a group that's compact enough and large enough to get to a majority. And so to create an Asian majority voting age district would not be possible under the Jingles preconditions. Same with the African Americans. We won't be able to create a majority African American or Asian American district. And that's more where she was coming from. But under the Voting Rights Act, the groups are protected. And one can take into account trying to draw districts that unify communities of color. But remember, when it comes to a requirement to be required that you must create this district, that's where you're looking at districts that more than 50% adult Hispanic or more than 50% adult Native American on the reservation. So hopefully that helps.
Thank you very much.
Districts 5, Steve Smotherman and Robert Aragon.
Madam Chair, just want to remind the committee that all documents that we will be viewing are public documents and must be made available to the general public. Furthermore, I'd like to point out that we are under the Open Meetings Act, and I would like the chair to go ahead and review what a rolling quorum is and what the requirements thereof are so that the body will understand. Madam Chair, if you would do that, please.
Yes, so we did talk about how I think we would be able to vote in a meeting, and it would just be majority.
The issue, Madam Chair, is the Open Meetings Act. If you could go ahead and advise the membership of the parameters outlined in the Open Meetings Act so that there's no violation of such.
And so if you're concerned about there being a violation, Member Aragon, why don't you state what your concern is?
No, I'm just asking the chair to make sure that the membership is fully advised as to the premise and the rule requirements outlined in the Open Meetings Act so that we don't cross that line, particularly as it relates to the issue of rolling quorum.
Okay, if you'd like to speak on that, that'd be great.
Just asking the chair to go ahead and advise the committee because it's your role, Madam Chair. So if you would, please.
I'm not certain how we're going to handle rolling quorum. I believe that we need to make sure at the start of the meeting that we have a quorum in order to be able to start the meeting. And then if we're taking votes, it's the majority of who's present.
And Madam Chair, don't mean
to help out with that one a little bit.
Please. Yeah.
Yes, if you would, please. Thank you.
In terms of rolling quorums, this is when the committee would talk about matters outside of a committee meeting.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes.
Via email. And in general, as staff, we tend to try and avoid that happening by accident. And so whenever I or others of my colleagues send out emails with, for example, public comments ahead of time,
I understand. I do understand. So I want to again, thank you, Petra, but I want to again ask the member, what is your concern about rolling quorums? We know that we're not to be having meetings where there's a quorum of 5 or more of us outside of this meeting. So what is your concern?
Well, my concern is that we just advise the body of what it means and how we have to be cautious of that. so that we're not in violation of the Open Meetings Act, because it is one of those areas where bodies such as these sometimes do cross that line, inadvertently mostly, but making sure that they understand the parameters of particularly what a rolling quorum does.
Thank you very much. And so we're going to do that. Petra, if you will, go forward with, reading and admonishing us about making sure that we're not meeting outside of the public meeting.
Thank you. Yes. So outside of these meetings, you should avoid talking with other committee members about the content that we'll be discussing in these meetings. The issue of a rolling quorum is when you have committee members that reach a majority talking about committee business. The rolling quorum in today's day and age most often comes up via email, where you have an email chain with all of the committee members or a large number of the committee members on it. And a discussion ensues through a series of reply all emails. In order to avoid that, we will aim to always do BCC on the emails. So you'll get an email that comes to you that says, "Good afternoon, committee members," but it'll just have your name on it and some staff. So we can try and avoid having any rolling quorums. But also just in general, you'll want to try and avoid talking about committee business with committee members outside of the committee meeting. Mr. Aragon and Madam Chair, does that cover the rolling quorums?
Madam Chair, Ms. Morris, thank you so much. I think it's an imperative that we have a full and complete understanding of that, so we'll operate within the parameters of the law. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Ms. Morris.
Thank you, Member Aragon. You keep us honest, and we'll make sure that we are complying with all the rules and having a completely transparent process.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
So moving on to District 6, Catherine Mcgill and Mr. Nahar is not on the call. So just yourself, Madam Chair, for District 6.
Thank you. I just want to say that, I'm so grateful for the presentation. I learned a lot in the presentation and have been in District 6 for most of the time that I've been in Albuquerque. And I'm happy to say that it is one of the most diverse districts in the state, areas in the state with so many diverse populations, a lot of multifamily dwelling units, and that we're really happy that we're going to actually get an opportunity to look at this from a data-driven perspective. And I really want to make sure that we are involving the citizenry, the people that we are pledged to serve. If, I was talking with someone and not another member of the committee or about this earlier, but just some people in my office about the fact that I'm not sure that if we went up to 10 people that they would be able to tell us what city council district they are in, what the boundaries of it are, or that they would have any idea why redistricting is important to them and why it's about the voice of the voters. I'm hoping that we can use this process as an opportunity to both educate the public and that we won't get bogged down in minutia, but that we really look at what we need to do in Albuquerque, in Bernalillo County, to make sure that our citizenry is educated and that they really are participating in a real way in the process. We apologize. I believe that Member Latham was referring to the fact that Asians were not mentioned in the report that was given by Research and Polling. I think that was an oversight, and we apologize for that. We want everyone to belong and everyone to be included, and so we will make sure that when there is an oversight, that we recognize it. That when we are, not sure, that we get clarification. And it's really important to me to be able to represent District 6 in the area that I love, but I also love the entire city of Albuquerque, and I want to make sure that we're at the top of all the good lists.
Thank you. District 7, Travis Kellerman and Heather Bergmans.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Petra. I appreciate the support for this grounding framework and in a data-driven dialogue in this committee. And also I want to echo, Madam Chair, what you said about education and really amplifying what we're doing here to make sure residents understand the importance of this all through the process. They have access to the data that we're using and the conceptual maps and every part of the process as we go through this. So transparency is a principle in this dialogue as well. Viewing the residents and the public as core stakeholders in what we're doing. When I look at the principles of redistricting here, I think through that framework, we can accomplish a good balance for what we're trying to ultimately achieve, which is taking into account what has changed in the past 10 years, but also what we've learned throughout the history of this city that has led to unequal representation and also inequality in our infrastructure. So to that end, I wanted to note something I didn't see in the presentation, which was quite detailed and deep, and I appreciate Brian and Brittany's work on that. Taking into account income and occupation, essentially class demographics in our city, and really focusing on economics and having an inclusive and economically inclusive city that is represented in that way as well with our new districts. So I wanted to add that layer and something to consider, and also a call to that data, which may or may not exist in current census data, and we may have to get creative with how we source that and combine it. So Madam Chair, I wanted to also thank you for your leadership and stepping up to moderate this meeting and these meetings going forward.
Thank you very much.
District 8, David Buchholz and Kevin Powers.
Yes, if I could, and thank you. At this point, I'm more of a process person than goal-oriented. So I'm interested in, from the chair and from the staff, some expectation of how we're supposed to do our work. In other words, how will we set an agenda for the next meeting and meetings? What information will the staff be preparing for us? And in particular, and maybe a little premature for the next meeting, how will the original maps be drawn? Who will be responsible for preparing different choices in regard to the maps? And how much of that work will be done by us in public, and how much will be done in staff and then distributed to us in the future? It may be early because this is the first meeting, and I'm sure that folks have not spoken too much with each other about what their intentions are. But I'd like to have some sense of how this is all going to work and the process that we will go through, because we do have a lot of technical materials and a lot of work to do to get to the results that we need to get to.
Thank you, Member Buchholz. I think that's a really great question, and I'm sure that all of us have. You know, as when you bring something to the table, I'd like you to, if you have a recommendation for what you think we should be doing, since you have, you know, so much experience in the process and you understand it, what is your recommendation about how?
Well, I'll tell you where I start, but obviously everyone should have input on this. I know Mr. Sandroff for a long time, and I trust his work. It is tremendous. And I would expect that we would ask them to be carrying a heavy load in the beginning in order to provide us the information that's necessary, and even to provide alternative choices. I think we may need a bunch of different choices based on the presentation that we heard today. I think there are, to my surprise but interest, there are real challenges in how we're going to deal with those 3 districts on the west side. The fact that there's only one bridge, city to city, and that we have continuity issues to deal with. So my sense would be that I would be asking a lot from that group to provide us all information in advance, and that to the extent we can do public meetings where we roll up our sleeves and review those materials and then come to a decision among ourselves in front of the public, that would be my sense of how it ought to operate. I think Madam Chair, I think you'll have important responsibilities in guiding the staff and guiding those folks, if everyone agrees with that type of process, in making sure that they do that work, that they have materials available to us in advance of our meetings, and that we set sufficient time to be able to do the work that we need to do to get this done. So that's my thinking on how I would suggest that it work, but I think it's important that other members also have input on what their suggestions would be as well.
I agree. And, I certainly believe that all of us will have an opportunity to weigh in on how we think we should get options of what maps we're going to look at, and then also how we're involving the public when we're at those meetings, or how we're receiving comments from the public. I would like to hear from both the consultant and the staff about what your thoughts are about how these processes have worked in the past.
Madam Chair, thank you. I will hand over to Brian to answer the majority of this, but we as staff will be a little bit more involved at the front end in terms of setting the agendas and the consultant doing the mapping. But as this process grows, the agendas will grow out of the previous meeting. We will work closely with you as the chair to review those agendas. And in the same way, I believe the maps will also grow out of the content of the meetings. But I will hand over to Brian to answer the majority of this because he's far more experienced in this than I.
And what I would like to ask Brian as you're answering is if you could tell us when we'll get those items to review so the committee has enough time to review them prior to the meetings.
Right. So as David, Mr. Buckles suggested, perhaps more heavy end work on the front end from us at research and polling, which we embrace. As mentioned in the presentation, our plan is for the next meeting to actually show alternative approaches and concepts of how to address the population shifts that have occurred that Brittany Poss spoke about, how that the West Side now has sufficient population for 3.25 city council districts. And so we have to get somehow 1/4 of a city council district over to the east side of the city and then deal with the ripple effects. So they are called concepts. So there's something that you could look at and react to and say, I like this, I don't like that, and then we can fine tune it from there. So it's our hope in the next meeting to actually show different plans. If we get our act together, we'll get it to you a couple days before the meeting so you can look at it. We'll post it on the website as well. But yes, for us to develop alternative approaches for your consideration, for you to react to those approaches, and then in the next meeting, 1 or 2 weeks later, for us to come up with refined concepts based on public input and committee input. Then 2 weeks later at the next meeting, adjust those plans again based on what we heard. So it's an iterative process where we constantly adjust the boundaries or come up with new concepts based on public feedback and committee feedback. Those reports will include all the statistics necessary. How close are the population deviations? What's the percent adult Hispanic and Native American and African American and Asian in each district? All of that data would be provided. And then hopefully by the end of this process of 8 meetings, you'll have plans that you really like.
Madam Chair, this is David Buckles. I very much appreciate Brian's responses, and frankly, not a surprise. It was important to me to put that on the record here this evening so that everybody would hear what we've gotten ourselves into and the work that we need to do. So I'm looking forward to seeing those materials and working hard with everybody to work through them to get to a good result.
Thank you very much. And I like the fact that you're saying that everybody that's on the committee is going to be working together, and also the constituencies that we are pledged to serve. So we're going to really work hard to center the public's voice in those organizations who've been working hard on these processes. But what I will say is that you're probably a whole lot smarter than me, and I will allow you to guide and help to shape this process based on what you know about it for the future, so that we can really have serve well. Yes.
Madam Chair, probably older, but I'm sure not very much smarter.
All right. Who's next?
Madam Chair, we have District 9, Kenneth Pascoe and Thomas Stahl. And also I would note that Mr. Romero has his hand raised after we hear from District 9.
Yes.
Okay, thanks to the company Research and Polling for a really excellent presentation, and I look forward to getting that available to all of us on the website. I'll start thinking about how this problem can be solved. Looking at the shape of the city of Albuquerque and applying just the principles of contiguity and compactness, we're constrained a lot in the kind of solutions we can see, unless something sort of radical happens. But I just, starting with the districts we have, there are some obvious moves and a lot of detailed work to make sense out of all of those. So looking forward to it. Thanks to everybody, and thanks to the city staff for doing a good job getting this all put together in the first place. That's all. Thanks. Bye.
Yeah, this is Tom Stahl. I ditto on what was just said. And with the presentations that were provided, I think that will provide us with the information for a data-driven dialogue, which I really look forward to working with everyone on. And when we couple that with the principles that were provided, we have our work cut out for us, but I really look forward to seeing what we can do to come up with a equitable solution for Albuquerque, because like so many other people have said, we owe it to the constituency of Albuquerque to have districts that reflect Albuquerque. So I really look forward to working with everyone to provide that to the city of Albuquerque. Thank you.
Thank you. Member Romero.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just very quickly, will there be provisions or a process for the public to submit maps? How would they do that, should they care to?
I am not certain what that process is. We did have a request to find out about, how the public might submit maps and whether or not we're going to have district for, as they did at the state level for Bernalillo County, for people to be able to submit maps. So we'd hear from staff and Research and Polling about how we are going to capture public comment on this process outside of the meeting time that we can bring into the meeting.
Madam Chair, committee members, yes. So I'm not sure the answer on the mapping tool Districtor, but certainly, and if anyone has the capability and interest in drawing a map, they would submit that in the same way they could submit public comments. They'd send it to me a hard copy and I can scan it in for you guys. It can come in via email. It could be presented during public comment as well. If it comes in either hard copy or via email, I'll be providing that to you guys. My aspiration is to collect all the public comment between meetings up until the Tuesday lunchtime before the meeting. That would be the Tuesday lunchtime would be kind of the cutoff. Staff would then package that into a PDF that I would then email out to you before the end of the day on the Tuesday, so that you've got some reading material for the evening before the meeting and some time to digest it coming into the meeting on the Wednesday evening. So that would be the method.
Can I ask if there's a way that we can put something on the website so if people want to make a comment or if they want to send an email directly, that it makes it a little bit easier for them to do that?
Absolutely, yes. There is some language on the website that just directs people to send comment to me, but I'll add some extra language about the 1 o'clock before the Tuesday before the meeting, so that people know there's a deadline.
Does that answer your question, Member Romero?
Yes, it does. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. I think that we have heard from everybody at this point. Are there any other final comments about the process? It looks like we are almost at the end of the meeting, and I would give staff or Research and Polling an opportunity to have a last word, and then I'll ask for a motion to adjourn.
Madam Chair, nothing on our end. Brittany or Michael, anything we missed? Nope.
If there are no other comments, then I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Moved.
Second.
Seconded.
All right, it has been moved and seconded, and we will adjourn this initial meeting of the Redistricting Committee. We will reconvene in this space on March the 23rd. Thank you all.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks all.
Thank you all.